Bjorn Andresen, the actor and musician who captured the world's attention in the early 1970s with his haunting beauty and mysterious presence in the film Death in Venice, has died at the age of 70. His death was confirmed by Swedish newspaper Dagens Nyheter through Christian Petri and Christina Lindström, the filmmakers behind the 2021 documentary The Most Beautiful Boy in the World. They did not reveal the cause of death, and perhaps fittingly so. Bjorn's life was always surrounded by an aura of quiet tragedy and elusive meaning, much like the film that defined him. His passing marks the end of a life that was both illuminated and shadowed by fame, beauty, and the impossible expectations that came with being labeled something as fragile and heavy as the most beautiful boy in the world. When Bjorn first appeared on screen in Death in Venice, the Italian director Luchino Visconti's adaptation of Thomas Mann's 1912 novella, he was barely 16. Yet his ethereal appearance, the pale skin, delicate features, and near-supernatural composure transcended his age and turned him into a symbol. He played Tadzio, a young Polish boy vacationing in Venice with his family, who becomes the object of obsessive admiration for the aging composer Gustav von Aschenbach, portrayed by Dirk Bogarde. The film's story was one of aesthetic fascination, desire, decay, and mortality, Visconti's masterpiece of beauty and death. And Bjorn, with his angelic face framed by golden hair, became the living embodiment of that paradox. Audiences were entranced, critics were unsettled, and Bjorn himself, still trying to understand who he was, found himself trapped in an image he never asked to create. In Cannes, when Death in Venice premiered in 1971, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Cameras flashed endlessly. Journalists crowded around Visconti and his young discovery. And soon, Bjorn's life would never be the same. It was Visconti who introduced him to the press as the most beautiful boy in the world, a phrase meant to capture his aesthetic perfection, but one that instead became a curse he could never shake. He was no longer Bjorn Andresen, the quiet Swedish teenager who loved music and solitude. He was an international fascination. In that moment, he became both myth and prisoner, adored and consumed by the world's gaze. Bjorn later said he felt like an exotic animal in a cage. That metaphor followed him throughout his life because it spoke to something deep and tragic about the human condition, about being admired for something you never chose to be. He didn't feel like an actor. He didn't feel like a star. He felt like an object of fascination, something displayed rather than understood. In interviews years later, he would confess that the label had screwed up my life quite decently. It was the truth, simple and brutal. The very thing that had given him recognition had also stolen his peace. Born on January 26, 1955 in Stockholm, Bjorn's childhood was marked by both beauty and sorrow. His mother died by suicide when he was just 10, leaving him in the care of his grandmother. She was the one who pushed him into acting, seeing in her grandson's looks a kind of destiny, perhaps a chance to turn tragedy into opportunity. To her, his beauty was a gift that should be shared with the world. To Bjorn, it would become a burden he could never set down. That contrast, the external beauty and the inner fragility, was what made him unforgettable on screen, but it also mirrored the tension of his own life. He grew up without the comfort of normal adolescence. While other boys were discovering themselves privately, Bjorn was being photographed, analyzed, and adored by strangers across continents. After Death in Venice, he became a phenomenon in Europe and Japan. In Japan, he was adored like a pop idol. His face appeared in magazines, on posters, and even in manga illustrations that depicted idealized versions of him. He released music, performed with local musicians, and learned to navigate a culture that treated him with reverence bordering on obsession. To many Japanese fans, Bjorn wasn't just an actor. He was an aesthetic ideal, a real-life personification of something divine and unattainable. His presence influenced art and anime aesthetics for decades, particularly the Bishonen, beautiful boy archetype, that remains deeply embedded in Japanese culture to this day. But for Bjorn himself, that adoration was alienating. Fame, he found, was not a warm embrace. It was a spotlight that burned too bright. He once described the experience as surreal and dehumanizing. People didn't look at him. They looked through him, projecting their fantasies and desires onto someone who was still trying to find his own reflection. I felt like a ghost in my own life, he once said. Everyone saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. It was a confession that cut to the heart of what it means to be mythologized, to lose your identity in the collective imagination of the world. Back in Sweden, Bjorn tried to reclaim his sense of normalcy. He pursued music, a lifelong passion that offered him something acting never could: freedom. He played piano and composed, immersing himself in sound as a way to heal from the chaos of his early fame. He found solace in melodies, in the simple honesty of creating something without being watched. Yet the shadow of Tadzio never left him. Journalists continued to ask about death in Venice, about Visconti, about his beauty, about the experience of being the beautiful boy. It was as if the world refused to let him grow older, to see him as anything beyond that fragile image frozen in time on the Venetian beach. The 1971 film itself, though celebrated as a masterpiece, was controversial. Critics debated its themes of desire and morality, and Bjorn's portrayal of Tadzio was at the center of that storm. For Visconti, the film was about the pursuit of beauty and the inevitability of decay, art as both worship and destruction. For Bjorn, it was something far more personal. He was a teenager being filmed through the lens of adult fascination, directed by a man obsessed with capturing perfection. Years later, in interviews and in the documentary The Most Beautiful Boy in the World, Bjorn described feeling uncomfortable with certain moments during the production. The weight of being sexualized at such a young age left deep scars. The world saw art. He felt objectified. The experience blurred the lines between admiration and exploitation, and it haunted him for decades. That haunting became the focus of The Most Beautiful Boy in the World, the documentary that revisited Bjorn's life 50 years later. Directed by Petri and Lindström, it followed him as he confronted the ghosts of his past, the lingering impact of fame, and the identity he had long struggled to reclaim. The film was not merely a biography. It was a meditation on beauty, trauma, and the cost of being seen. Watching Bjorn as an older man, still fragile, yet filled with quiet dignity, was heartbreaking. His face had changed, but the melancholy in his eyes remained. He spoke softly, sometimes hesitantly, as though words themselves carried too much weight. It was clear that the boy who once mesmerized the world had grown into a man who never fully escaped that moment in time. In one poignant scene, Bjorn visits the Venice beach where Death in Venice was filmed. The wind blows through his silver hair, and for a moment, the past and present collapse into one. He stands there not as the beautiful boy, but as a survivor of his own legend. That moment encapsulates his entire journey, a man reclaiming his own narrative after decades of being defined by others. The documentary gave him back his voice, something fame had stolen from him at 16. Through it, audiences finally saw not just Tadzio, but Bjorn, the human being behind the myth.